Welcome to day number 2 of this 5-part series. This webinar, this masterclass, is on perfectionism. This is a big one. We've got a lot of people from all over the place. Maddie's in California. We got Carrie in Rockledge. Roseanne in Ephrata. Is that how I pronounce that, Roseanne? Roseanne's in Philadelphia area. Canada, 2 Canadians in the house. Welcome, everyone. All right, let's jump into the content here. If you have questions about anything tonight, I am able to see your questions as we go on, so you can go ahead and type in whatever it is that you want. So my purpose is to spend roughly 30 to 45 minutes or so talking about what I know to be true about the game of success in this whole world of Mary Kay. I've been coaching in this world for a long time. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. And on this webinar, we're going to talk about what's at the core of perfectionism, not quick fixes that aren't going to work. We're going to break it down and dissect what perfectionism actually is. We'll talk about the pain and solutions as well as the ambition of perfectionism. And then we'll talk about how you can get individualized support. Most of you, if not all of you, probably not all of you, but most of you are in the Pink Caddy coaching group. If you're not, join, please, so that you can be a part of the conversations that we're having in that group, and you can share any of your ahas from this webinar in that group. There's a handout for all 5 of these sessions in the files section of that group. You were also sent that in email. If you have questions, type it in the box, as I said. And my invitation to you is to take notes of inspiration. Don't be so concerned with what I'm saying on my slides. You can always go back and capture that stuff. But whatever thoughts you have in your head, that's the real gold that you want to take notes on and implement from those notes. And then stick around to the end. I'll talk about how you can get some free personalized support to attack your perfectionism or anything else that you're really struggling with. So what I want you to understand is that it's absolutely possible to clear your perfectionism. My invitation to you is to suspend any disbelief that you have around what's possible with personal development in general or with yourself. See, most of us have these stories about how we can't win, and everything that we've tried in the past hasn't worked. And those stories a lot of times cause us to not see possibility and not pay attention to things that actually could change our lives. So my invitation to you for this webinar, at least, and as you go forward, is suspend all that disbelief about what's not possible. It won't get you anywhere in life. It'll just create more misery. So the truth is, it is possible to clear away your perfectionism instead of just agreeing with the thoughts that you have in your head or wrestling with the thoughts that you have in your head. And it can happen relatively quick. Quick is a comparative term. So most people have been dealing with some form of perfectionism for decades, and yet they don't want to spend, a few months working on it. So if you're willing to do what it takes and work on yourself and confront what needs to be confronted, then absolutely it can be done. And then once you get rid of that pattern, or at least you improve the pattern, then you'll be able to attract, you'll be able to be more authentic, you'll be able to be more real, you'll be able to be more energetic, and all of that will lead to an attraction in your life and business as long as you're willing to take action. And Antonella said it best. As soon as she got rid of her perfectionism, my income tripled immediately. So I think most of you can budget your income tripling. If you cannot, then there's a different conversation that we need to have other than this webinar. So here's the problem. We all already know what to do. But for most of us, perfectionism is stopping us from being fully committed to those activities, because if we're not perfect, then we don't want to try. Or if we're not really close to perfect, then we don't want to try. And so it causes us to not implement the things that we know how to implement or we know what to implement. And if we do implement them, we do it in a safe manner so that we can't give it our best and then still potentially fail. Now, the perceived solution to perfectionism is not the actual solution. And I'm going to break that down later. If you cope with the perfectionism when it paralyzes you, and that's really the effect that it has on pretty much everyone, it's going to suffocate you. It's going to suffocate your business. It's going to constantly create struggle. And it's really settling for less than what you can create on this planet, in your business, in your family, in your life in general. And as I said, it does not have to be that way. So what most of you want from my studies and work in this industry or this particular company for over 13 years is that you don't want to feel the restriction. You want to be free emotionally and spiritually and physically and in every other way to work your business. You want to attract success rather than feeling like you're always chasing people down and like trying to rope cattle, which is not easy. But that's what a lot of people feel like in direct sales in general, not just Mary Kay. And let me say, if there's anything that I say in this webinar that sounds derogatory, demeaning, negative in any way towards Mary Kay, it's not meant that way at all. There's nothing that's a Mary Kay specific problem. I'm using a lot of Mary Kay specific examples because that's who's on the line, but nothing is specific to Mary Kay. These are all behavior challenges for humans, and humans are in Mary Kay. So that's the overlap there. You also want to feel committed and you want to act on your commitment, and you really just want it to be fun and simple, right? And of course, you're in business, you want to make good money and not lose your sense of balance in the process. So let me briefly tell you a little bit more about me. If you don't know me, my name is Sean Smith. I'm down there in the picture there with my family, my wife Sybil, my daughter McKenna, and my son Exley. They're 16 and 13 now. And they're just everything to me. So that's my bigger commitment. I got involved in the world of personal development when I was first nearly killed when I was 13 years old. I say first, it was the only time I was nearly killed, but that was my first entrance into this world. And I was involved in a hit and run accident where a car ran over me doing 50 miles an hour and they just took off. And I realized in that moment that, my life could have, and by the details of the event, probably should have been taken from me that day. And of course, I didn't have any warning. I wasn't preparing for it. I was actually super excited about life in general, and I almost died. And so I realized that we only get one shot and it can be taken away at any moment. And if I only have one chance on this planet, then I want to give it my all. I don't ever want to look back on a life of settling, on a life of mediocrity according to my standards. And I don't ever want to look back and say, what if I would have tried harder? What if I would have avoided certain things? What if I would have committed to other things? What could I have become? To me, that is the most painful question we can ask ourselves looking back, is what could we have become had we done the right things? And I'm putting that in quotes, right? And so that's what drives me. I'm driven by regret, by the fear of that kind of regret. But even though I made that decision to myself, I still struggled for a long time. It wasn't until 2005 when I had a huge breakthrough in a personal development seminar with a life coach that walked me outside of the room and did a coaching process with me that I really fully understood the power of the unconscious mind and how we can change in a very, very short period of time our belief systems, our neurology, our memories, our everything. And I had that kind of an experience in about a 15-minute space. I felt like I became a new person. I felt so much lighter. And I went home and a bunch of people were asking me what happened. You're smiling too much. You look too happy. What's going on? And so I was driven by sharing this experience with other people. And then the next year I fell into the world of Mary Kay and haven't left. And so I've been teaching and training and coaching and studying Mary Kay IBCs for 13 years. I've gotten to know a lot about the female mind. I've gotten to know a lot about the company. I've gotten to know a ton about this whole business and what the main reasons are that people struggle and what the answers are. So let's get into perfectionism. The core of perfectionism is a limiting belief. We all have limiting beliefs. A limiting belief is just a belief that holds us back from doing something. And the limiting beliefs that usually are at the core of perfectionism are some form of not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. Therefore, I need to get better. But not just better, I need to get perfect. And when we have a pattern of perfectionism based on a not enough belief, then what we will tend to do is we will search for our enoughness in one of two ways, or our self-worth. The first way that people will search for their self-worth and enoughness is through the approval of others or the opinions of other people. That's what we tend to call the pattern of people pleasing. And the way that works is if you don't feel like you're good enough, then you want other people to tell you that you're good enough. So you're going to do whatever you can to please them, to get their approval and to get their verbal approval. But it doesn't last very long. As soon as you get somebody to tell you you're good enough, you're going to want it again, either from them or from somebody else. So it's a very shallow path that we try to find our enoughness with when we're doing it in the opinions of others. The second way is through our accomplishments. So the thinking is, if I can perform perfectly, then maybe I can be good enough. And I would say in the history of the world, that hasn't worked. I've never known anybody that has done it and produced happiness. There are a lot of people that have created solid perfection habits and become incredibly good at what they do. I don't know any of them that have been happy at the same time if they're operating from a limiting belief of not being good enough. That doesn't mean that anybody who's achieving a high level is not happy. But if they're trying to prove themselves to themselves or to somebody else, and that's why they're achieving at a high level, then that'll never produce happiness. So most people are running around with perfection tendencies in search of their enoughness through opinions of others or through their accomplishments. And the big problem here is that will never stop unless you get to the actual issue. So the real issue here is that we have been programmed to have an unhealthy relationship between person and performer. What that means is we think that our enoughness is determined by our performance. So when we were young, if we got A's, our parents celebrated us, congratulated us, maybe rewarded us. But if we got C's and D's, they probably didn't. Or maybe you brought home one of those report cards with like 5 A's and 1 C, and one of your parents, it's usually the dad, that says, "What happened there? Why'd you get a C?" Those are the kinds of experiences that scar us. And life is really set up to compete for the most part. So when we're young, we're competing in sports, we're competing in our families with our siblings, we're competing in school. And so we are programmed pretty much our whole life that our value is determined by our performance. They usually don't bring people up and celebrate them for poor performance. They celebrate great performance. And so we think that performing really well is going to make us feel good, and we don't deserve to feel good unless and until we are performing well. That right there is where this gets really painful and damaging and juicy, and I'm going to dive into that here in a moment. So when we have this belief that performance equals value, then we have this connection that I feel good if I'm performing well. If I'm not performing well, I don't feel good. If I don't feel good, the way to feel better is to perform well. And that's how we live our lives. So the thought is, if I can perform perfectly, then I can feel perfectly, or I can feel really good. And what this is a conflict of is who you are versus what you do. When who you are as a person, your value, is mixed in with what you do, you will forever be emotionally unstable. And I would say at least 95% of the women in Mary Kay who struggle are putting their self-esteem on the table. Whether you know it or not, you're putting your self-esteem on the table for people to crush. So if you ask somebody for their name and number and they tell you no, and you feel bad, that means wrapped up in your request of their number was also your request of their approval. So if they say no and you feel bad, the only way that can make sense is if you just perceived that as a rejection of you, of who you are. So that means that your performance in this case is so bad that these people wouldn't say yes, wouldn't give you the name and number. They don't join the business. They don't become a customer. They don't do whatever it is that you wanted them to do, which means you messed up. You're not a good performer, which means you're not valuable. You're not worthy. You're not good enough. So when our performance has a direct connection to our emotion, then we, in all likelihood, have this connection that who we are is attached to what we do. And that means there will always be emotional risk to our performance, which means we won't want to try. If trying to get somebody's name and number, if trying to approach somebody to join your business, if trying in any way could potentially lead to an emotional meltdown, you won't want to try unless it's guaranteed that you're going to win. Now, what's the guarantee? What's the only way that you can guarantee you're going to win according to this thinking? Well, that's to be perfect, because perfect people always win and never lose. So that's the spiral that's going on inside of the perfectionist mind, and all it does is create misery. Because even if you achieve perfection, you won't achieve happiness, which is actually worse than at some point in time finally surrendering and stopping the cycle of trying to be perfect. So this is the big connection here. As soon as you separate who you are from what you do, and you realize that your performance cannot increase your value as a person or your enoughness, whether it's good or bad. In other words, you can't increase your value by performing really well, and you can't decrease your value by failing a lot. As soon as you make that connection that your enoughness is finite, then there's no risk to the performance attempt. So if you ask somebody for their name and number and they say no, and your enoughness is separate from your performance, then that can't hurt you. And if it can't hurt you, you can't be afraid of it. That's the key piece. Now, a lot of people can't even imagine doing that because this is the way that you've operated your entire life. But just because you can't imagine it doesn't mean it's not real. And the longer you spend making your choices based on what you can and cannot imagine means you'll never get out of the container that you're currently looking in. I mean, think about that statement for a moment. If you're searching for all of your solutions inside the current container that you have, all you can possibly get is everything you've gotten in the past. The container has to be broken. We've got to look outside of the box that we're currently living in the box that we've always been operating in order to get results that are outside of this box. So if you say to yourself, I can't do that because I've always been this way, you've just cut yourself off from the possibility of changing. This is what I asked you to suspend at the beginning of this webinar. And it saddens me to the point where I can feel it in my bones right now, the sadness of when human beings have pre-decided what they can and cannot accomplish based on the limitations of their mind. So what I'm telling you with every ounce of my being is that this is possible. And for those of you that think it's absolutely not possible for you, not only is it possible for you, that means you need this more. If your belief is so solid in what you can and can't accomplish, you need this more. So even if you don't understand how this feels from an experiential place, that doesn't mean it's not possible. So with perfectionism, the perceived pain is failure. What that means is we think that when we fail, it causes pain. But that's actually not what causes the pain. What causes the pain is the self-abuse that we participate in after we fail. And we could even attack the idea of failure, which is a construct of the human mind. That's a judgment that we make. So there's no such thing. There's no real thing as failure. But when we say we failed and it comes from a perfectionist mind, then we think that the failure causes the pain. But the failure does not cause the pain. It's what you say to yourself after you've failed that causes the pain. So if the perceived pain is failure, then the perceived solution is success. That's what almost everybody thinks is the only way around this emotional devastation, is to just get better, not just get better, but get perfect. If you're perfect, you'll never fail. That's what the mind says. So we focus on becoming more successful. And that's usually by external means, by improving your status, like by rising through the ranks of Mary Kay, or by getting into the Cadillac, or getting into the director's suit, or having more money, or losing more weight. We think that if we get more perfect by external measures, then we can avoid the painful feeling which is caused by failing. The reality is, since the actual pain is caused by self-abuse, then the actual solution has to come in that conversation. We have to stop abusing ourselves, especially women. So the actual solution is unconditional self-love and acceptance. Because somebody who unconditionally loves and accepts herself will not abuse herself unconditionally. But most of us only have conditional self-love. We love ourselves as long as we're performing right. We love ourselves as long as we're perfect. We love ourselves as long as we're polished. We love ourselves as long as we're pretty. We love ourselves as long as we're not screwing up. We love ourselves as long as we're better than every other person we can possibly compare ourselves to. When all of those conditions are met, then we love ourselves. That will never change the perfectionist patterns. It will actually just cement them harder. So when we can come to the place of self-love and acceptance, it's actually much easier to take the quote unquote risk, because the risk isn't emotional anymore. So it's so much easier to perform. And when you do perform, it won't give you a sense of validation as a person. It's fun. It'll feel good. There's nothing wrong with liking to perform well. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But there is something wrong with being emotionally devastated if you don't perform well, because that's going to make it harder to try later on. So we have to remove this tendency to abuse ourselves, especially as women. I mean, think about it. Whether you have a biological child or not, you all have motherly instincts. And if you had a little girl in front of you who came to you and said, "Mommy," or "Sister," or "Ma'am," it doesn't matter what the relationship is. If this little girl is looking up at you and saying, "I tried to ride my bike, but I fell down, and look at how ugly my knees are now," or "I tried to put together this Barbie doll house and I messed up, I'm so stupid," your divine feminine motherly instinct would not beat that little child up verbally. You would tell her it's okay. You would tell her she's okay. You would tell her it's totally fine to make mistakes. You would tell her to keep trying. But that's not what you tell yourself. So what that means is, when the little girl is you, you're much more likely to beat her up for not being perfect, and in that moment withholding your love until she becomes perfect, than you would do that with anybody else. And if there was only one person that you were going to reserve that unconditional self-love for, it should be yourself, or unconditional love for, it should be yourself, because then you could give it to everybody else from more of a pure rooted place. But what most women are doing is they are abusing the little girl that needs the love the most. And that is anti-feminine. That is what I call the masculine wound, punishing people for not being perfect. So when you stop the self-punishment, then you can stop the self-abuse, which leads to the pain of perfectionism. Or let me say it a different way. When you can stop the punishment and the abuse, which leads to the pain, then you can stop the need for the perfectionism. I hope this is really landing for you. If it is, please let me know. If you're on the webinar and you can type it in, please let me know if this is landing, because you have to understand that perfectionism is not a solution to a problem. I'm sorry. Perfectionism is the solution to a problem. We think perfectionism is the problem. We say, if I was only not a perfectionist, but my mom gave it to me, or everybody in my family is, or society gave it to me. We have these justifications, and we say, if I just wasn't a perfectionist, then I could win, then I could be successful. The reality is, your perfectionism is a solution to a problem. It's not the problem. The problem is the self-abuse. So the goal, whenever we want to stop a pattern, is not to just wrestle with the pattern, but remove the need for the pattern. So as soon as we remove the need for the perfectionism, then we will be more authentic as ourselves. And the reality is, we all know at a certain level that it's impossible to be perfect. But this thinking won't allow us to live that way, because we're constantly chasing our validation through our performance. Now, I don't want you to get rid of the ambition, though, that is inside of perfectionism. Inside of perfectionism is a desire to do well. It's a desire to succeed. And we don't want to throw the whole thing out. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We just want to get rid of the perfectionism tendencies, but not get rid of the ambition. So please don't think that what I'm saying is that you have to get to the point where you don't care about succeeding anymore. That's not the answer either. We just want the success ambition to be coming from a healthy place instead of an unhealthy place. So you want to hold on to the ambition inside there, and my invitation to you is to change the wording. So don't language anything around perfectionism. Don't talk about perfect. My advice, if you can, is to never use the word again. Now, that might not be practical, but remove it as much as you can from your vocabulary, because it doesn't do any good. Unless you're one of the very, very few people who are driven in a healthy way and can use that word in a healthy way, then go ahead, by all means, keep doing it. But for most of us, it is a very unhealthy word, so don't use it. But capture the drive still, and I would suggest using the word excellencism instead of perfectionism. Now, excellencism, to my knowledge, is not an actual word, which is why it will be so powerful when you use it. Because when we're wanting to change patterns, we have to do things that are not typical of us. We have to say words that we don't usually say. We have to use phrases that are somewhat uncomfortable even, or sound weird, because we're making changes. So using words like excellencism is actually a good thing if we're wanting to change our patterns that we don't want anymore. And when we do that, when we can capture and nurture the strive for excellence, but release the need for perfection, then what we'll do is we'll start judging ourselves on effort and not results. That doesn't mean that we don't pay attention to the results, and it doesn't mean you can't look for results and want results. All of that is fine. But we have to judge ourselves by taking the effort, because that's the only thing that could lead to results. But if your only motivation is the result, then most people are going to need a guarantee that the result is going to be what they want in order for them to take action. So we have to start nurturing ourselves, just like that little girl who fell down riding her bike. Nurture to get back up and keep going, and congratulate, acknowledge, celebrate our effort, not only our results. Now, all of what I've said in the last 20 minutes or so is incredibly important from a leadership standpoint. If you are a leader of teams, especially women, do not only celebrate accomplishments. You have to celebrate effort, especially for women. You have to celebrate effort. That doesn't mean you have to stop celebrating accomplishments, but don't make that the only thing that you celebrate. Otherwise, you're not going to be getting the most out of people. So let's retain the ambition inside of our natural human desire to succeed. So this is not in your handout, this piece here. I'm just going to talk a little bit about you and reality. From what I've learned in this personal development world, and specifically in Mary Kay over 13 plus years. Your most valuable asset is you. By the way, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in, but put a little Q next to it so that I can see the distinctions between the questions that you have. So like Linda just said, but why do I hold back the effort? Everything I've been talking about, Linda, the effort is scary, because if you give effort and you don't get the result, you're going to beat yourself up. So you're not afraid of the effort. Your mind has just programmed you to believe that you are. You've been convinced that you're afraid of warm chatting, or you're afraid of making phone calls, or you're afraid of recruiting conversations. You're actually not afraid of those activities, but your mind has convinced you that you are, because when you participate in those activities and it doesn't go well, you beat yourself up. So what you're really afraid of is beating yourself up. So your most valuable asset is you. You're at the core of everything, obviously. And you can study as much as you want how to change behavior in a general sense. But if you don't study yourself and how you are implementing that behavior, then you'll never get the results that you could otherwise get. And there's a distinction in personal development that we really need to understand. The distinction is between our body and our mind. Our mind is the problem. Our intellect is the one that's convincing us that we're afraid of the activities, and it's convinced us that we should be perfect. Our mind is the one that creates all the fears. Our body is actually the one that fuels the car. Our body is the one that keeps us going. It gives us the drive. And there's actually a lot of research now that says our bodies are making the decisions even faster than our minds do. And yet most people are just trying to be so intellectually driven because they don't want to make wrong decisions. They don't want to make dumb decisions. They always want to do the right thing, the smart thing. But our body is actually more powerful than our mind. And when I talk about our bodies, I mean our physical experiences. Everything that's ever happened to you literally lives in your body. And we have a neurological makeup. We have a neurological body. And so what happens is a lot of times you will be intellectually prepared for something and neurologically not prepared. So you might rehearse the script that you want to use on the woman that you see across the way in the department store or when you're out and about, and you know what to say, you know how to overcome any objection, you know everything in your mind to do, and then you start walking toward her and then you freak out. Your mouth might get dry. You might misdirect yourself with some other thought. You might tell yourself some scary story about what if she yells at you or she's too put together to need this opportunity, or maybe she's not put together enough to need this opportunity. Whatever you do to yourself to talk yourself out of those things that you know how to do, that's a neurological issue. That is an issue where your body has convinced you that you're not going to do it. It's not safe. It's not going to be fun. It's too dangerous. You're going to look stupid. You're going to mess up. You're going to fail. Our bodies are actually way more important and are way more powerful than our minds. But what most people are doing is trying to solve their body's issues with their minds. And you have to understand, your mind created all of the problems. So like even in the question that was just asked, how do I do this, or why do I do this? That's an intellectual question. The intellect is trying to get the 1, 2, 3 process for fixing a problem that it created. Now, we also have to understand there's no reason for the intellect to solve the problem that it created. So we're asking the problem to solve itself. And that's just never, ever going to work. But that's what almost every single person is trying to do. Now, this isn't an easy switch. We've been programmed to live by our intellect from the earliest memories that we have. And our intellect is not bad. It keeps us alive. It helps us drive to work or wherever it is that we drive. It helps us achieve goals if we don't have all these other obstacles. It really, truly is a very powerful asset, but we can't live by it exclusively. So don't ask your mind to solve the problem that your mind created. But when people hear this concept, a lot of them go, I don't understand what that would look like. Exactly. That's my point. You cannot understand what it would look like because you've been operating a certain way for your entire life. That's where we have to suspend the disbelief of our intellect, especially knowing that it is the problem. And if we really want to get deep and real, then most people don't fully and completely love, trust, or believe in themselves. And in my experience, that's especially true for women in business. Business is already a challenging game. And if you're going to beat yourself up during the times that you don't achieve, during the times that you're not perfect, and you get into a business which inherently is going to have more failure than success, you can't win in that game. You certainly can't be happy in that game. So if you're like most people, you've got to get outside of your current thinking box. You've tried everything that you've tried, and it's gotten you everything that it's gotten you. Now, I'm not going to say it's been useless. I don't know your situation, but I do know if you're still listening to me at this point, you want more. And so everything that you've tried has been perfect to give you what you currently have, and it will never give you anything more than what it's capable of giving you. So everything that you've tried is great, and you need to try something different in order to get something different that you haven't experienced. And so most people are in this place where they've just struggled so long, but they don't believe anything else is possible, so they convince themselves they're happy when they're not. And I think that is maybe the greatest tragedy of a human's internal existence, at least. The mind that has convinced itself that it's happy when the heart is not. So any investment of time and energy and money in yourself is the smartest investment you can make because you are the most valuable asset. But don't seek to just understand and label yourself and just cope with whatever it is that you learn. You know, personality assessments a lot of times are labels that we use to cope. I'm trying to think of, my mind is going blank right now, outside of personality assessments. That's the one that's certainly on my mind. I know like in the Mary Kay world, you talk about the DISC personality a lot. There's another NTFJ personality assessment, Myers-Briggs. All of those are great as long as you don't use them to restrict yourself. So if you say, I am a D personality, therefore I cannot, I don't care what goes after that, that's restriction. And in reality, I believe that those personalities are actually learned behavior patterns. I don't think people are born in any of these kinds of labels. When we're talking about behavior patterns, behavior is learned. And you can say to yourself that you are a procrastinator, or you are a certain kind of personality type, or you are a certain type of generation. And all of those things can have meaning to an extent. But if they're restrictive and you're only seeking to understand, therefore you stay inside this little box, then you're never going to change your life. So I don't want you to seek answers to the question of why can't I win, or why can't I succeed, or why can't I do better than what I've always been doing. I don't want you to seek answers to why you cannot have a breakthrough. I want you to seek the answers to how you can. And what I'll tell you is everybody is capable of it. I teach a kind of coaching that I coined neuro-transformational coaching. That's my term. And what it means is transforming people's neurology, not just imparting more intellectual knowledge. That's not the answer. We need to change our neurology. We need to change our beliefs inside of our bodies. We need to change our certainty. We need to change our makeup, our emotional, spiritual, physical makeup, so that we have the body for the results that we're going after. Almost everybody has the mind for the results. You have the information, which is why it's so frustrating when you don't implement and you don't follow through and you don't produce the results that your mind is prepared for. So almost everybody is intellectually prepared for the results they want, but they are neurologically unprepared. And what does everybody do? Focus on intellect. So if you're neurologically unprepared, meaning you don't have the body yet to be a director or to be a national or to get in your Cadillac, more intellect is not going to help you. It can't, because that's not the problem. So we need to take a look at the body. We need to look at the beliefs. We need to look at your values. We need to look at your just whatever's in the way, the programming that's in the way. And I want you to really grasp this concept, this bullet that's on the screen right now. Nobody is incapable of returning to herself. See, when people think about coaching and performance breakthroughs and what their capabilities are, they are usually comparing their current reality to what it is that they want, and they think they need to become somebody different. They think they need to get something different, and the mind will find all kinds of reasons that you're not going to be able to do that. But every single one of us can return back to who we already are. That's what neurotransformation is. It's not becoming somebody new. It's returning back to the person that you already are, because the problems that we need to get rid of are not in who you are. They are in the programming that you've picked up along the way. So nobody is incapable of returning back to herself. But if all you do is make these behavioral demands without changing your body, then you're just going to be in a struggle. It's going to be a miserable struggle for a long time. So that's not what this coaching is. It's actually removing the struggle. The more struggle you feel, the more entangled you are in your programming. And what a lot of people think is that if the struggle is very difficult, then the solution has to be very difficult. And that's actually, it couldn't be more wrong. But that's the way the intellect thinks. But neurotransformational coaching is when you return back to yourself, you actually untie the knots instead of trying to tie other knots on top of the knots that are already tied. It's about going back to yourself. And here's what I've learned in my experience: trying to change behaviors at the surface without changing the neurology underneath. I mean, what I wanted to say is that it's pointless. I don't really believe that it's pointless, because you can make a very small amount of progress, and I don't ever want to poo-poo progress. So progress is good, but long-term, pointless. It's impossible, because it's the neurology that creates all the patterns. So if you don't change the neurology, it's like trying to change a flower. You're planting the same seed all the time, and you get angry because the same flower keeps popping up. If you want a different flower, you have to plant a different seed. It's just as simple as that. So if you don't change the seeds, then all you're going to do is have this difficult process of band-aiding the approach, and it's always going to be short term. Even if it works, the best it can be is short term. Now, we also don't believe that anything, I want to highlight this, I've already alluded to it a couple of times, I think. We don't believe that anything needs to change in the person, just the programming around the person that's not working. So the real person actually returns. So it's about uprooting the actual causes of the behavior, not just wrestling with the behavior. And all programming can either be shifted, lessened, or removed completely. Now, this kind of work can be applied to anything you want in your life. It can be applied to goal setting. We can create memories in our brains to fuel your motivation and inspiration to attain future goals. We can increase confidence in your body. We can increase self-esteem. We can remove a lot of those hating patterns, the self-hatred, if that is something that you've struggled with. We can remove a lot of the pain in our neurology that is getting in the way of everything that we want. We can remove beliefs or dissolve beliefs or increase positive beliefs. We can remove conflicts, whether it's a values conflict, an identity conflict, an emotional conflict. We can help people release pain, release grief, release shame. I mean, these are the things that are actually at play. It's not the script that you have. It's not about whether you understand the process of the doing. It's about whether your body is capable of the doing. So that's what this kind of coaching really is. And it applies to leadership as well. I already talked a little bit about that. I mean, it applies to everything. And I want to speak to something that somebody wrote in the comment section. I haven't read your whole thing yet, but I want to speak to something that is very, very real, does not get taught or brought up, discussed very often in society, but it's happening all the time. It's operating all the time, and that is trauma. Now, trauma is different for all of us. We've all experienced trauma. Trauma doesn't necessarily mean deep, deep abuse or victimization. Trauma could be that you were in a military family and you went to 7 schools in your first 8 years of grade school. Trauma could be that your best friend moved away. Or trauma could be very deep, emotionally devastating experience, crimes, abuse, victimization of deep, deep pain. But trauma lives in our bodies. No matter what it is that we've experienced, it's in our bodies, and then we make decisions for the rest of our lives to try to protect ourselves from being re-traumatized. A lot of women are trying to protect themselves in a masculine way from having their trauma re-exposed, re-triggered. And really what that means is that your trauma is now controlling your life. Even if you think that you've found ways to not touch it and pretend it's not there, it's actually more in control of you when you're pretending it's not there than when you're touching it. So avoidance is never a good strategy if you seek control. So all people who've experienced trauma of any kind in their lives, whether it's deep or shallow or anywhere in between, will live with it in their bodies unless and until they release the neurological effects of that trauma. So for instance, a lot of women are actually really afraid of visibility. And yet they're seeking to be more successful when more success equals more visibility. You can't do that. Your body's going to win. Your body will produce emotions. It will produce thoughts. It will produce things that keep you out of the spotlight, because that's the only place you can get hurt, is when you're seen. A lot of women have a deep desire to speak their truth verbally, but they have a deeper fear of their truth being trampled on. So whatever your body is carrying around, and I don't necessarily mean physical, although for some people it is a physical manifestation, but whatever your body is carrying around, it either is the right recipe for what you want or it's not. And for most of you, myself included, it's not. Otherwise, we would have already gotten it. So then the question becomes, do you want to change it or not? That's it. Because you only have two options. You either change the programming that's not producing your goals, or you stop wanting your goals. Those are the only two options. Because you cannot achieve your goals without changing the programming. That will not work. So if that's not the option that will ever work, although that's the option that pretty much 100% of the people are searching for, but if that won't work, then you only have two choices. You either give up on your goals or you change the programming and give up on the struggle. And when you do this work, I mean, amazing things can happen. Kimberly was very, very successful, but she just wasn't fulfilled. And I'm not saying by any means that people who are successful in Mary Kay or successful in other areas of life are not fulfilled. She just wasn't. And it wasn't until she did some of this neurological work that she really started to remove a lot of these patterns, and now she just lives in total joy. So I don't have anything for you to buy. What I do have is an invitation for you to experience what I've been talking about, which is a neurological coaching experience. So this is an actual coaching call. This isn't going to be one of those calls where you get on the call and all that happens is you're just sold a bunch of expectations. You know, when you buy this program, we'll do this, and if you pay for this coaching, you'll do this. We're going to give you the experience. Because here's the thing. I said a while ago, and I think I've alluded to it several times, that so many people don't know what's possible. I still do this work because of what I experienced on a piano bench in 2005. Not because of what my mind decided I was capable of, but because of what my body experienced. And to this day, it drives me. So one of my missions is to get people to understand neurologically what's possible. And that's what we want to offer you, is an experience, not a sales call, an experience, an actual coaching call, so you can identify what changes need to be made and actually do some of the work right there on the call. So my goal for you is to have a neurological shift on the call. And then we can talk about how do you keep that going as you go back into the normal routines, right? So it's a free call. You go to that link right there, book my call. And there's no risk. There's really no reason to do it. The only reason I can think of that you wouldn't do it is if you don't want your goals. I mean, why would you not have an experience that's designed to help shift some of the blocks that you're carrying around and bring it more into your awareness. I don't know, unless you've just decided that it's not possible, and then that's a different conversation. And what I would say is, if you've decided that it's not possible, that's more of a reason that you need the call, so that we can attack that programming of it's not possible. That's a huge deterrent for success and happiness. So assuming that you're not more committed to struggling than achieving your goals, take us up on the call. So the question that most of us really need to be asking ourselves when it comes to personal development and achievement and taking action on anything is not what's the cost of taking action. Because most people say, if I take this action, what bad thing could go wrong? But truly successful people, in my opinion, my definition of success and happiness is, what could go wrong if I don't take action to change what I know I'm not satisfied with? What could go wrong? What could go wrong is nothing changes. That's the biggest pain, is that nothing does change. So don't think about what can go wrong if you take action. Think about what can go wrong if you don't take action. Because at the end of your life, I fully believe this, having experienced the death of my two parents in a very short period of time and having to talk to a lot of people inside of this conversation in personal development and regret, you won't care about whether you achieved your goals. You'll care about whether you tried. You'll care about whether you went for it. So if your current body is not allowing you to go for it, then that has to be cleared. So ultimately, you have two choices. You can cope with the perfectionism, keep doing what you've been doing, keep using the labels that haven't worked, keep trying the things that haven't worked, and hope miraculously that they work. Or you can do something outside the box and actually clear away the problems. So I'm going to look at the comments here. I haven't really gone into the comment section. I want to address one of them. One comment says, I know what to do, how to do. I'm frozen. The body doesn't pick up the phone. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. I don't need to know you to know you don't have the body to achieve your goals in Mary Kay. That's it, period. We don't have to go any further. Then the next question is, do you want to have the body for it or not? And if the answer is yes, then book a call. If the answer is no, then please, in order to make yourself happier while you're renting space on this planet, stop pretending that you're really, truly committed to your goals. And I don't mean to say that in a demeaning way. I just mean to say it in a realistic way. If you're not committed to doing the work that's required to get your goals, then you're not committed to your goals. And if you're not committed to your goals, then I would advise you to just be happy. There's nothing wrong with being happy where you are, if it's true. There's nothing ever wrong with true happiness, in my opinion. And you don't need to be a national sales director. You don't need to be a millionaire. You don't need to have 15% body fat. You don't need to have any of these external things that most of society thinks that we need in order to be happy. So if you just disconnect yourself from the misery that's being created by focusing on goals that you ultimately aren't actually truly committed to, then that's fine too. The question that you asked is, how do I get out of my mind? See, that's your mind asking the question, how do I get out of my mind? The short answer is, you got to get into your body. And then the next question will be, well, how do I do that? And that's where the conversation ends, unless you have an experience. You will not allow yourself to get out of your own mind and into your body, because your mind is the problem. It's trapping you for a reason. So what I would say to any of you that have a similar question like that, the fact that you can't comprehend the answer is a reason to book a call. Don't wait until you can comprehend the solution to a problem with an intellect that is incapable of comprehending the solution to its own problem before you take action on solving the problem. But honestly, that's what most people are doing. Okay, I'm fully committed, but I'm not going to actually take action steps until I can see the whole process. If you could see the whole process and you could do it on your own, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would have already done it. So sometimes we just have to take a look at reality, just without judgment. The fact that you don't have the body for making phone calls doesn't mean you're a loser. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're undisciplined, but the intellect will tell you are. And the only way to get around that is to be more perfect, to do better, perform better. That's the perpetual cycle that almost everybody is in, and they never get out of that cycle. Somebody asked, when you say neurology, are you speaking of how we think? No, I'm actually speaking of the exact opposite of that. How we think is our intellect. The way I'm using the word neurology is everything else. It's our body. It's the makeup of our emotions. It's what produces fear. It's in the cells of our being. That's what I mean. And whether that's the scientific definition of neurology or not, I don't know. But I'm making the distinction between our bodies and our minds. So our intellect versus our neurology. So that's what I mean is our neurological experiences. So the woman that can't pick up the phone, it's because she has a neurological experience in her body that's not allowing her to pick up the phone. That's the difference. Somebody said, I've been doing this for 41 years. So I want to book a call. Yeah. 40 years, 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, 10 minutes. It's too long. It's too long to struggle. I don't quite know why we are so almost violently committed to our intellect. I mean, I think I know why. I don't really understand how it all happens. But it's really because we're afraid of failing and being dumb. We're afraid of not having value. So we're so driven by getting things right, being perfect, because our intellect thinks that if we can be perfect, then we will be without failure. We will be without defect. And it's just simply not true. Somebody says, so in a sense, the automatic physical response our body has to what we have told ourselves all our lives. Exactly. That's it. It's the automated responses that our bodies have. I mean, think of all the intellectual ways to get around fear. It's false evidence appearing real. Every no gets you closer to a yes. Just have faith. Fake it till you make it, or faith it till you make it, or whatever you intellectually understand. Does it work? No. Because you can tell yourself that, and your body still produces the fear. Your intellect is all satisfied and pacified, like, oh, yeah, this is just false evidence appearing real. And in that time, your body has produced fear. So, since the fear produced by the body is going to outweigh the pacification of the intellect, then my invitation to you is go for the solution that has the ability to stop producing fear in your body. Don't go for the solution that's just going to give you more intellectual satisfaction. Somebody says, I was taught the intellect is the ego. It must survive, so it lies to us to do that. Yeah, I don't use the word ego all that much just because I think it kind of has a bad rap and it has a lot of different connotations to it. But in the way you said it, I would agree. And it doesn't matter so much that we get the labels right. What matters is that we focus on what's going to help us in our life. So call it the ego, call it the intellect, call it the mind, whatever you call it, the effect is what we're really interested in and changing the effect. And what you said is true. You know, the intellect, if we go to our intellect or our ego and say, you know, this perfection thing that you've been working on for so long, can you just stop that, please? It really truly believes that its life is on the line, because that perfectionism was created as protection against a threat. Now, the threat is you. The threat is us. We're the ones that are abusing ourselves and producing the negative feeling. But the ego thinks, and the intellect thinks, that perfection is to protect against a threat. So it's not just going to drop it. And it's certainly not going to give you the answers to release it, meaning the ego or the intellect, because in effect, that would be suicide. If I'm saying that the intellect is the problem as it relates to having the body for living a happy life, if the intellect is the problem, why would the intellect effectively commit suicide by figuring out a way to remove itself? So from that sense, if we personify it a little bit, it really truly is fighting for its life. But not only is it fighting for its life, it does not understand what we're asking it to understand. That's why, another reason that it can't solve the problem. And I don't know that I drove this point home, but not only will we not be able to change our circumstances from the current perspective that we have, we can't get ourselves out of our current perspective. We need outside help. I've been coaching for 13 years. I cannot coach myself. I think I'm a pretty good coach. I certify coaches. I've certified hundreds and hundreds of coaches. So I'm not only a coach, but I train coaches how to coach, which means I'm pretty smart when it comes to coaching. I can't coach myself. I just can't, because it's not the way the brain works. Yet, almost everybody is trying to coach themselves. So almost everybody is literally, I'm saying this literally in every way possible, literally trying to do the impossible and then beating themselves up when they're not able to. People go, I just can't seem to get rid of these thoughts. Yeah, of course, because you can't. No, but I know what to do, but I can't seem to make that fear go away. Yeah, because you can't. No, but you don't understand. I mean, I know what to do. I've been doing this for so long and I just can't get rid of these negative things. Yes, I know. I hear you. It is possible and you cannot do it. Most people, because of the ego, will try, though, until they've just had enough. So if you're at that point where you've had enough of the struggle and you're willing to experience what can change, then book a call. Yeah, it's like somebody just said, it's like asking a robot to destroy itself. It really, truly is. So last question here, commit to clearing the perfectionism. What does that mean? Does that mean booking a call? Yeah, that's the invitation that I'm making for this webinar right here, is get help and have a neurological experience so that we can prove to you what it can be like if we start messing with some of the programming that's in your way. So I know we've run a little long. I hope this has been valuable to you. It is, somebody just said, it is like people have too much pride. I agree with that. I think that in that context is a function of the intellect and a function of the ego, because we don't want to admit that we need help. That means we're weak, and we spend our whole lives trying to not be weak. So it is somewhat of a simple understanding when you understand how the ego works, you understand how masculinity works. But it's just such a pervasive, damaging, devastating problem that it's seemingly everywhere in our life. So again, we've gone on a little long today. I hope it's been valuable. I hope you book a call. I hope you take us up on this offer, and I'll come to you. Those of you that are registered here, we'll be doing 3 more series, or 3 more sessions in this series. We'll be talking about procrastination, the fear of rejection, and the fear of success. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will talk to you soon. Take care, everyone.